So when it comes to JoJo's Part 5 and the Frieza Saga from Dragon Ball Z, these two story sagas have a lot in common to the point of being what I would consider to be literal parallels of each other because of the many things that they do similarly in terms of how they handle the events of their own story arcs, themes and characters, while still being very unique from one another because of the many differences between them. So in this video I'm going to be discussing the artistic parallels and some of the differences between the Frieza Saga from Dragon Ball Z and JoJo's Part 5 Golden Wind, along with what makes these two story sagas so special as well. So without any further ado guys, let's get right into it. So to start off, I want to talk about the main protagonists, deuteragonists and antagonists of these two story sagas, along with their dynamics and similarities to each other. For Golden Wind, it is Giorno, Bruno Bucciarati and Diavolo, and for the Frieza Saga it is Goku, Vegeta and Frieza. Now even though Giorno and Goku are very different characters from one another with completely different values and goals, the two still share quite a bit in common. For one, they are static characters, basically characters that go through a flat character arc where they always believe in their truth with determination against a doubtful and skeptical world. They may doubt themselves and the world around them from time to time, but in the end their will is and always will be unbreakable, while also influencing others instead of changing themselves along the way. Now despite this, the two protagonists still go through a bit of change themselves. With Goku, it was accepting his Saiyan heritage and embracing it for what it was before his showdown with Frieza after Vegeta's death greatly affected him. And for Giorno, it was learning to deal with the inner conflict within himself by finding a perfect balance of when to be kind and when to be cold and ruthless, but in a manner that was authentic to him rather than putting on a facade of a gangster like he did in the beginning of the story during his fight with Bruno Bucciarati. Speaking of Bucciarati, believe it or not, but he shares a lot of things in common with Vegeta, especially when compared to Goku and Giorno. For one, the two start off as villains when they first enter their own stories. They both fought the protagonists and then later walked away when they were almost close to ultimately being killed. With Bruno, Giorno spares him and even admits that had Bruno not been affected by the 14-year-old kid being a victim of drugs, then Giorno would have lost the fight and been killed, hence why he chooses to spare him and have him join his side to take down Diavolo. And with Vegeta, Goku convinces Krillin to spare him because he wants another chance to fight Vegeta again in the future, while also admitting that he just wasn't strong enough to compete with the Saiyan Prince at the time, which really goes to show you just how formidable Bruno and Vegeta were as enemies before they turned into characters that sided with their respective main characters. Now another major thing that the two share in common are their very personal dynamics and backgrounds with the respective villains of the Frieza Saga and Part 5 Golden Wind, who are Diavolo and Frieza. With Vegeta, he always hated Frieza, even since he was a child, as he was always well aware of how much the evil tyrant looked down on him and his race, especially after later finding out that it was Frieza who destroyed Planet Vegeta and the other Saiyans as well. But before the events of the Frieza Saga, his hatred for the tyrant was something that he always kept under wraps, as he knew that challenging him would be an unwise move due to how powerful he was until he discovers the Dragon Balls. Bucciarati goes through a near similar story with Diavolo because, like how Frieza had always been a negative influence in Vegeta's life since his childhood, Diavolo was the same for Bucciarati. When Bruno was 12, his father was a victim of an incident that involved drugs and then died several years later, after Bruno was forced to swear loyalty to Diavolo's organization so that way him and his father would be safe and protected, only for Bucciarati to later find out that this was also the same organization that was responsible for him losing his father in the first place, which would cause him to secretly hate his boss, but not enough to the point of wanting to betray him, partially because, like Vegeta, he knew that challenging Diavolo would be a unwise move due to how powerful he was. When he later meets Giorno, he only agrees with assisting him to help uncover Diavolo's identity until he finds out that him and his team were used as a shield to escort Trish to him so that he could kill her himself and remain anonymous, which, as you all know, infuriates Bucciarati to the point where he decides to assassinate and kill his former boss, only to be viciously overpowered by the boss's King Crimson in a one-sided fight. Vegeta goes through a near similar event as well, because when he fails to become immortal with the power of the Dragon Balls, he's then forced to confront his former boss. Despite knowing that his chances of taking him down are very low, he's able to match Frieza in his first form, but after Frieza transforms, it all just goes downhill for Vegeta. When Frieza enters his final form, Vegeta becomes overconfident in his ability to defeat him because he thinks that he's officially become a Super Saiyan after his final Zenkai boost, only to later realize that he in fact didn't. And like when Bucciarati challenged Diavolo, Vegeta is hit with the realization that his former boss is way out of his league, to the point where he never even got a chance to touch Frieza once, and proceeds to get viciously overpowered in a one-sided fight where Frieza later tortures Vegeta by treating him like a punching bag just for fun to scare Piccolo, Gohan and Krillin. When Goku comes in to challenge Frieza, Vegeta realizes that Goku has the potential to become a Super Saiyan, which is partially the reason why he proceeds to open his heart to Goku and tell him the truth about what really happened to the other Saiyans and Planet Vegeta, leaving the duty of taking down Frieza in his hands after he is killed by his former boss. And even though Bucciarati's actual death doesn't happen until later in the story of part 5, we still see a similar thing happen with him and Giorno during the final fight, where Bruno explains to him how much working under someone like Diavolo had slowly been crushing his soul until he met Giorno in Naples, who helped restore his dying soul by giving him an actual purpose to make the world a better place. And after Bruno tells Giorno all of this, he then leaves the duty of taking down Diavolo and his King Crimson in Giorno's hands by giving him the arrow. All of this so far greatly highlights the similarities between these two story sagas of Giorno and Goku, two main protagonists that respectively are forced to take on the torch passed down to them to defeat their respective main antagonists by Vegeta and Bucciarati, two tragic protagonists who respectively were trying to fight and take down these very same antagonists who not only deceived and abused them, but also personally and negatively influenced their lives since they were literal children, only for them to be met with such cruelty and brutality at the hands of their respective oppressors. But Vegeta and Bucciarati are not the only ones that share a lot in common, as Diavolo and Frieza have just as much, if not more, in common as the main antagonists of the Frieza Saga and Part 5 respectively. But before I get into the reasons why, please make sure to like the video if you've been enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel and it helps spread the video to more viewers like you. Now then, back to the video. So when it comes to Diavolo and Frieza, they are both megalomaniacs and literal tyrants that abuse their power to oppress not only their enemies but even those that work under them. And when it comes to those that betray them, they show absolutely no mercy. With Frieza, he was able to rule 70% of the universe due to the power that he was naturally gifted with from birth, while also running a universal business where he would buy, sell or trade planets. And with Diavolo, he was able to gain a powerful stand like King Crimson after discovering the arrows in Egypt when he was just 19 years old, which would allow him to later run a successful mafia organization in the form of Passione, which would also allow him to influence and rule over the entirety of Italy as well. So as you can see, the two are highly respected and revered businessmen in their own respective stories, which is a big part of the reason why they both share this massive obsession of not only being powerful but also maintaining that position of power as well. So in the case of Frieza, he would seek to maintain it by becoming immortal with the Dragon Balls, and with Diavolo, he would hide behind Doppio like a parasite while making sure that his past and identity were forever concealed. But when he finally came to accept the futility of doing this after after running into Polnareff again. He then later decides to instead use the arrow's true power to help him, and I think it's interesting that despite how powerful Frieza and Diavolo are, the fear of them losing their positions as powerful figures would haunt them enough to have these driving motivations within their own stories. But an even more interesting thing to highlight about these two villains is how they both share the color purple as a big part of their color schemes, because in Japanese culture, the color purple is commonly associated with royalty and nobility. It also used to be a symbol of power by emperors and influential families throughout Japanese history, which is especially interesting because Diavolo and Frieza see themselves as emperors. So the fact that these two have the color purple in their own color schemes is not only interesting, but it also highlights that this was most likely intentional by their respective creators. Also, they both literally wear purple lipstick. Like, yeah, overall the similarities between Frieza and Diavolo's roles as antagonists are undeniable, but what is also very undeniable is the way that they parallel their respective protagonists in very similar ways too. Due to Frieza's cruelty and overwhelming power, which by the way he never had to work for a day in his life, he is seen as the very essence of hopelessness given form, while Goku in comparison is the complete opposite, because he is someone that is very kind and that always strives to push past his limits, making him parallel Frieza as a symbol of hope. Giorno and Diavolo also have a very similar parallel, partially because of the subtle yet brilliant religious imagery that symbolizes their very characters. With Giorno, he is metaphorically a figure of Jesus Christ because of how he influences and guides the rest of the main cast towards a bright future, a purpose that is bigger than themselves, serving as a beacon of hope. Meanwhile, Diavolo is the complete opposite. He is metaphorically the devil, not only in name but also because of his tendency to manipulate and deceive everyone else around him from the shadows. He's always abusing the weak and innocent as just a means to an end, while thriving off the suffering of countless people and getting away with it because of his ever so powerful stand, King Crimson. Another interesting parallel between Diavolo and Giorno that can also be applied to Frieza and Goku is how one was respected out of fear while the other was respected enough to be feared. With Goku, he became strong enough to fight powerful warriors like the Ginyu Force members and then later Frieza, which garners a lot of their respect for him and even Vegeta's too, because even though he is just a lowly Saiyan in their eyes, they still couldn't ignore the fact that he was still strong enough to take them on, something that a majority of the Saiyans from the past could not do. And with Giorno, even though he was constantly being looked at as a newbie, he was still acknowledged by enemies and allies alike for how cunning and flexible he was in almost any combat situation, along with how he was able to effectively push his allies to victory whenever he took a less prominent role. Case in point, Diavolo and Frieza were feared enough to be respected, while Giorno and Goku were respected enough to be feared. Now, another interesting parallel between Golden Wind and the Frieza Saga is how they center around MacGuffins. A MacGuffin, for those who don't know, is an object or device that is necessary for the plot and the motivation of the characters or said characters. In the case of the Frieza Saga, it is the Dragon Balls, and in the case of Golden Wind, it is the arrow, albeit more so in the last third of its story, but regardless, it was still very important. Earlier I mentioned how Diavolo and Frieza have similar motivations. With Frieza, he wanted immortality with the Dragon Balls, and with Diavolo he would later seek the arrow's true power to help evolve his King Crimson into a more powerful stand. Both of these goals center around very powerful MacGuffins, but it's not just the main antagonists that have motivations surrounding them, as the main protagonists do as well. For Giorno, him and his allies seek to attain the arrow to take down Diavolo, while Goku and his allies seek the Dragon Balls on planet Namek to bring back their friends to life, but they would also use them later to revive everyone who was killed by Frieza and his army, and also to send everyone who was on Namek to planet Earth except for Goku and Frieza, helping Goku in the process so that way he no longer has to hold back against the evil tyrant. Speaking of Goku's final final fight against Frieza, I think it's time to talk about the last major thing that Golden Wind and the Frieza Saga share in common, and it's their final fights. They both have many differences, but regardless, they share two major things in common that I think are not only worth discussing, but are also what I think make these two fights so special to me. For one, these final fights are not just between the main protagonist and antagonist, as Giorno has to fight alongside his allies to get the arrow before Diavolo does, and Goku, despite being way more powerful than all of his allies, still needed their help when he had to create the Spirit Bomb. Heck, you could even argue that the final fight with Frieza begins the moment Frieza first stands behind Krillin, Gohan and Vegeta, who try to keep him at bay along with Piccolo before Goku arrives. Regardless, had it not been for the interference of Goku's allies, then it wouldn't have led to the death of Krillin, which ultimately angers Goku to the point of him transforming into a Super Saiyan for the first time. And call it a stretch, but part 5's final fight almost goes through a very similar structure where Giorno also has to work with his allies, two of which were sacrificed in order for him to attain the arrow and evolve his stand Gold Experience into Gold Experience Requiem. And that's the second major thing that these two final fights share in common as well. The main character going through a powerful transformation in order to overpower and defeat their opposition, with the major difference being that the appearance of Goku's Super Saiyan form marks the beginning of Frieza's defeat, while the appearance of Giorno's Gold Experience Requiem instead marks the end of Diavolo's. So overall, those are what I would deem to be the artistic parallels between the Frieza Saga and Part 5 Golden Wind, two story sagas that I always felt had so much in common, to the point where I'd always be comparing them in my own head sometimes, not necessarily based on which one I thought was better, as I think both sagas are literal masterpieces in my opinion, but because of the many things that I felt that they had in common, so I thought why not make a video about it. And yeah, that's pretty much this video in a nutshell. Also, despite Toriyama Sensei and Araki Sensei being rivals back in the 1980s and 90s, they still had a great level of respect for each other as fellow mangaka that worked for Weekly Shonen Jump, so I wouldn't be surprised if some of the ideas present in Part 5 were inspired by the Frieza Saga, as it did come a few years prior. But who knows, maybe it's all just one big coincidence that these two sagas are so very similar to each other. But regardless, what do you guys think? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that notification bell for more JoJo and other anime and manga related content. And also, if you're a big fan of the fights in JoJo's Part 5, then please be sure to click on the video that is on the left hand side of the screen where I rank every single fight in JoJo's Part 5. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. This is your boy MAMZYY signing out. Take care and peace.